あのバッジを見るな海賊ども。
ソゲキング。
Subscribe to that channel.
了解。シャツファイヤーバードスター。
まさか。
完了。
Hello everyone, welcome back to my tier list series, plus cards to watch. This is going to be for OP10 and EB02. So getting into it, I want to start this off because there was a little bit of confusion for some people who clicked on the video. This is not a competitive tier list. I am playing to win for the most part, but I am doing so with an eye for what kind of makes sense to me and is fun for me. If you are here for a competitive discussion, this video probably won't be to your liking, so you can hop down into the comments and I will answer questions there. But I would encourage you to stick around, see things from maybe a different perspective. If you are here for the brewer's perspective, welcome, enjoy the video. I like doing these videos not from the competitive side, just so that us brewers have some content to watch and kind of discuss things that are a little off meta and so on. So getting into it, this is how I do my rankings. There are a few things to look for with any given leader. Does the card make me think? Cards that make me think either in-game or deck building are both good. Is the character from the show one that I like? This plays into it. I mean, this is my tier list. I'm a little biased. Does the card enable anything interesting? This would be cards that come into existing archetypes and can make something new out of them. And then the last bit is, do the cards have room to get better? I think that when cards are a little too narrow, it can be less interesting building them just because you know there's kind of a plateau on how strong they can get. Next will be the tier list, so I'll hop over to the video for that. All right, now on to the actual tier list. So if you've been following along with my videos, you'll be familiar with this tier list. If you had any questions about where the current positions were on the tier list, I'd point you to my other videos. But before we get on to the new leaders, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping with some old leaders that I've gotten a better chance to play in this last set, who I'm updating some of their positions. So the first one is this blue-green Sanji. I really did enjoy playing this one. It was really, really fast and really surprised me. So this is one that I'm going to keep on my radar for games to play. And as such, I'm moving it up further in B tier to put it next to Reiju. I feel like Reiju in this one had a similar sort of kind of swarm and big attack thing, and I feel like it's a pretty good fit to go right here. The next one we have is the green-yellow Yamato. This one is a pretty big improvement for me. I was actually quite impressed with how it played with the Fortress build, and it's one of those decks that I think has potential, especially with a starter deck coming, to get better. It didn't hook me as much as green-yellow or green-blue Zanji, but I do want to upgrade it quite a bit, and I'm going to put it right below the red Zanji. The red Zanji has that kind of really open-ended ability. This one does pigeonhole itself slightly more, so it doesn't quite reach quite the same heights. And the next one I'm upgrading, this I really enjoyed playing Chopper a lot this set, and every time I played it, it surprised me at how good it could operate. I am interested in seeing where this one goes, especially with some of the new support that comes in for Straw Hats. Everyone focuses on Zoro, but I do think that this Chopper has some real competitive reasons to pick it. The Odyssey Chopper is such a huge card for this deck and really makes a good argument for itself. And I think it's not quite going to make my upper echelon of leaders, the ones that I always am looking to play if I can, but it is a great leader nonetheless, and it does make it all the way up here to above Reiju and above that one. So the last one, and I want to emphasize that I am recording this prior to knowing the results of the ban list. So I want to tentatively call out Doflamingo here. I think that if this one is banned, doesn't get outright leader banned, if it gets balanced out essentially, and it doesn't become a dominant force like it is right now, I am interested in playing it some more. I've always enjoyed this leader. It had to come down partly because it just got a little too ubiquitous, and that hipster part of me just can't abide by mirrors too much. So if it comes down and the play rate is low enough to where I'm not as worried about running into mirrors, I do think it's a very interesting deck, and I think I'd bring it all the way up here. It'd probably be my top mono blue leader, and so it would come up here next to Boa. All right, with that out of the way, the next thing to get into is our new leaders. So the first one here, we have Smoker. I do think that this one is quite interesting. I wish that the Navy and Punk Hazard was a little more open-ended, but I do think that the trend to having green untap Dawn and really be able to generate a lot of mid and early game value in a way that is unique from purple is quite an interesting place to explore. And I do think that after playing some of the green-yellow and planning to play a kid deck in yellow-green law, I do think that my estimation on the 8-cost kid character has kind of raised green deck profiles. So I want to probably start this one off here below Limb. It is similar. I feel like it's pretty similar in my mind in interest to me as the red-green Odin or Limb. They're a little restrictive in the types that they support, but they've got kind of interesting abilities around that. And so that's where that one will fall. And the next one we have is Caesar. I was quite optimistic about Caesar when I first saw it, but I think the restrictions on it are just a smidge too restrictive on this one. It's one of those leaders that if they had opened it up just a little bit more, it would have gone up quite a bit on my list. But I think as it stands, its leader ability kind of pigeonholes you a little too hard into a certain set of cards, and I'm going to put it next to another similar kind of really type-locked leader of Carrot, and it'll be just below Carrot and above Z here. Sugar is one. I think I have a pretty big soft spot for event focus decks. You can see blue-purple all the way up here. And Ace, both event focus decks, and I think that event focus, as far as a kind of general archetype, is one that kind of interests me. I think that Sugar is probably the less interesting of the other ones, partly because of its type and partly because its ability does feel quite generic. So I don't want to it doesn't inspire me in the same ways that either the types for Brokeworks or the leader ability here on Ace is a little more interesting to me. But I do think because it's the event focused and I have a soft spot for those, it's still going to make the A tier. Then looking through, I think it probably fits in maybe here below Eva. I am interested in seeing a little more Eva support. And so that's why it ends up following behind that. But above Kinemon and some of the other leaders. The next one is the one that I think people are expecting me to rate highly. I've hyped it up for a couple of these videos before. We have Green Yellow Law. So we'll start off. I am going to put it in S tier. The question is where. The sim testing that I have done, it does hit some of the feeling of the Red-Green Law, which is a really good thing. But it is quite different, and I think that it focusing on being a kid deck compared to the aggro deck of Red-Green Kid puts it a little bit lower in my estimation. The next question is do I put it above or below Robin? The play patterns are there. The going on 8 kid puts it a bit lower, though, I think, than Robin, who's this very interesting kind of open-ended thing. Then the next question then is, does it fall below VV? And I think here is where green yellow finally does win out. VV, not being able to attack does kind of put you in a spot to get pushed out of the game. If your opponent can keep your board too clear, then you get pushed out of the game. And I think green yellow law here avoids that. So while I really enjoy all of these decks, this is where green yellow will ultimately fall. For more news on green yellow, I am starting my work on my big deck building video, that like what I did with Robin, but this time for green yellow law. So that's starting, and I think next week it'll go out. So keep on the lookout for that to kind of fill in the rest of my thoughts about green yellow law. Next we have Usopp. Usopp is one I'm a little torn on. I do think that the Dressrosa archetype is pretty interesting. I think that Rebecca does do it more interestingly, though, because of her not attacking makes for an interesting downside. Whereas Usopp kind of just says, do whatever you want with the Dressrosa package. So I find that a little disappointing. But it is a very sticky, generic, strong value deck. And I think that probably in where I'm interested to play it, it probably shows up in the B tier, probably similar to this 3D 2Y Luffy. Them both having the +1 effect is an interesting kind of angle for black, and I do like that as an alternate way for black to play the game. So I am interested to keep these ones, as well as where's black purple? Black purple. These 3 leaders, I like the kind of protection ability, but also the kind of opening up some interesting space with these. So I think this one does fall maybe a little lower than this one, because I'm interested to see how the ability can be maximized, and I do think that that will be most maximized in cards that are designed for this Luffy over this Usopp. So that's where it ends up falling. It is a character probably that, if the play patterns are good, has chances to move up for me. But as far as a brewing perspective, I think I'll put it slightly lower than the Black Luffy. Our final OP10 leader, we have Kid. And so I've noticed over a lot of the time playing with Robin and now going into green yellow law that yellow does have interesting effects that intrigue me, and I have a growing appreciation for yellow as a color. So it is going to get ranked higher than I would have originally expected when this one was released, or when it was released in Japan. The question then is how high? I think relative to the mono yellow leaders, it's probably lower than Vegapunk. Although Vegapunk is a kind of interesting flavor on yellow, with the inability to attack, and kind of shifts up the gameplay, starting at only 2 life. And then the next yellow leader being Yellow Mom. I think I would put Kid above Yellow Mom, but not by a lot. Yellow Mom is interesting, and that there is something to do with it. Whereas Kid is, I think, the stronger deck, but it is more limited in the cards that work with it. So it kind of makes for an interesting dynamic. But they're both playing with life in kind of interesting ways. I think ultimately I would put it probably just above Yellow Mom. So it would be my top pick for playing a mono yellow deck that wasn't Vegapunk. So if I'm trying to play a more traditional deck, this would be my highest pick for mono yellow. And so yeah, that's where that one goes. I do want to go over real quick the ST21 and the EB Luffy's here, because I don't think I'll make another one of these tier list videos until OP11, which would be after, so skip over these. So the ST21 Luffy, very similar in my mind to the ST01 Luffy, but I do like the 2 Dawn a bit more. I think it leaves more room to fit with interesting cards and be designed around interesting cards. That said, I worry that it will be a little too niche. The Two Dawn is a more specific need. So it's kind of that double-edged sword of they can make more interesting cards with Dawn x2, but the leader will be pinned more into those cards designed around it, whereas the ST01 Luffy fits with more cards and then gives you more room for creativity. I think overall, though, it does win out versus the Red Luffy, and looking at the ones next to it, probably over King and Kaido as well, but probably not quite to Kyros, so this is where he'll fall. And then finally, we have the EB02 Luffy, this green-purple Luffy. This one, I do think that the restriction to only Straw Hats is interesting. Restriction to only Straw Hats isn't as interesting as restriction to almost any other set, but the restriction does make your deck building kind of interesting. The upside being pretty strong, especially with the Sanji and Pudding card. And actually, unfortunately, the Sanji and Pudding card being as strong as it is a detriment for me personally. I like finding more interesting synergies rather than just you resolve one good card and then your leader is significantly stronger. So I am hopeful that this deck can get some more varied play patterns, but I do think that it's kind of interesting where it is even now. I think as far as placement on the tier list, I would probably put it below my top tier black decks, and black being probably my least favorite color to play, but it'd be very close. And putting it in the company of Arlong, who is interesting, just a little bit type locked, and then some of the yellow decks, which I have a soft spot for, but usually in the mixed variations. So that is the tier list as we have it today, and I'm going to pass it back to the PowerPoint to wrap up. All right, now that we've gone over the tier list, here's just a kind of image preview of that. Now on to the cards to watch. So this time there were a little bit more than usual, but I do want to go over before I get started the kinds of things that I'm looking for in these cards. I'm trying to find cards that aren't just the ones that everyone knows are good. So if you see one on here that you know is strong, feel free to add it to the comments, but sometimes the cards get left off this list just because they are more obvious and not ones that I think are as interesting for me to point out the strengths, because everyone is kind of pointing out their strengths. But that's not true for all of them. This first one here, this 2020 Chopper, I think is one that most people recognize as a very strong card. Being a 2K, 4K blocker, and in a good archetype are all really great cards for it. I think, though, I wanted to highlight this one because it is very flexible, and I think it'll see play in a lot of places where people won't expect. And it's something to keep in mind whenever you're building a deck that has red in it. Do you take advantage of your 2K slot with something that's more synergistic, or this very strong body? The next one I wanted to focus on was Monet. I think this one currently is a bit niche because it is pay 2 Dawn to get 2 Dawn, essentially, with the extra minus 1K just as kind of the cherry on top. I do think, though, this one is going to be one to watch for whenever we have leaders that have Dawn x2 abilities. This is going to be a really neat card to try to fit in because it acts as a pseudo blocker. A lot of the times your opponents don't want you to keep it, but it has that trade-off where that may be that all you get is you get a chump block and your abilities. But if it does stick for a turn, I think it has a lot of potential. The next one, the Kozuki Momonosuke. Wow. I do like their interest in taking the game and making searchers more interesting. Their searchers on their face are already very good, but the fact that they're kind of making some interesting types of searchers to kind of vary it means that there's room for them to add cards that interact with the different types of searchers. I think this one I'm most interested in because the green-yellow Yamato has a precon or a starter deck coming up soon. And with Wano, I think it's always useful to keep an eye on the searchers. The Wano Perona is one of the more interesting decks that I think that has popped up from the Wano thing, and it is very heavily focused around its searchers. So I always keep my eyes open when a Wano or Wano-like searcher pops up. The next one here, going along with that Perona that I mentioned before, is this Perona card. I do think that this ability is one that obviously is very strong in Perona, and one that I'm interested in trying to make work with Perona. I think that possibly where they're pushing with the Thriller Bark is to do a more aggressive take on black. And I'm really hoping that they do find the balance to make it work. I will probably try to, during this set, play Perona for a weekly with a more aggressive mint to it, but it will take me a while to kind of formulate the exact list. Next one we have here is Cavendish. I think everyone recognizes this one as strong and Usopp, but I wanted to highlight its strength elsewhere in the meta. I do think that Vivi is a potentially interesting place for this one to land, being that it has the vanilla stat line, and it draws cards immediately when you're playing Vivi. That can be a lot of card swing, and if the meta ends up slowing down, this is the kind of card that can help Vivi stay in the game longer, as long as you don't get puddinged, kind of thing like that. So I just wanted to highlight it there for Vivi in particular. Sabo here is the next one. Being a 2K counter, it's always at a baseline pretty good effect. And then I think its protection ability to protect a 7-cost or lower is one that's pretty interesting. I think this one needs an ability that can summon it out alongside something else. And if you can manage that, that seems like a very strong protection ability to have on a 2K. So I am interested in keeping my eyes on this one to see if there is room for a deck to come out. The next two, I think, are kind of leaning into that event focus. I mentioned it during the tier list discussion that I have a little bit of a soft spot for event focused decks. And I think the event focus in Don Quixote Pirates makes for an interesting angle for purple, and I do hope that they continue to do this and continue to make more interesting events. The obvious one in particular with Senior Pink is the Gum Gum Giant. It's a card that you can play in any of the purple Straw Hat leaders. Well, not in green purple, but any of the other purple Straw Hat leaders, be it Robin or just purple Luffy or black purple Luffy or blue purple Luffy. All of them have kind of interesting synergies to, well, I guess it's not that interesting. It's one of the cards that you always have to keep in mind unless it gets banned, which if it does get banned, I'll add an addendum to this section. Dawn -1 to get back Gum Gum Giant is very strong. And then with Rosinante, I do think that one of the downsides you can run into with Gum Gum Giant is if you run into too many of them, you can get caught in a spot where you are reliant on your Gum Gum Giants to survive, and using 2 of them puts you too far behind to where you can't close out a game. So I do think that Rosinante giving you the ability to trash extra Gum Gum Giants if you need to, but also to set your Dawn active at the end of the turn so that you're ready for them. That is one of the things that, while most of the purple decks can do pretty effectively, getting an extra Dawn or 2 during your turn can be enough to really swing some pivotal points in the game. So I wanted to highlight those Don Quixote pirate cards. The next one we have here is Perona. Going along with the other Perona, I do want to find a list for Perona that is more aggressive, or fitting in with Moria. I think that this kind of effect is something that is likely to kind of juice up the aggro on one of those leaders, and I'm just interested in trying to test it out. The last one, I think, is one that people recognize as pretty strong, but because of the yellow decks that are out there for the most part, this is not necessarily high on the list of finishers, but I really do think that if yellow can take a good aggressive tact, that there is a lot of more interesting gameplay than what maybe a Nell or Katakuri puts out. And so I always like to look for the alternatives to the existing yellow top end, because the existing top end fits better typically with the more control-y version. So this being a more aggressive bent for yellow is kind of attractive to me. So those are the cards that I wanted to highlight of cards I'm watching for OP10. And all right, so now if there is ban news, it will be here, and my discussion on the bans will be right after this. All right, now on to the ban list discussion. So I'm just going to start out. This is not the list I expected, and I'm still processing this. This is a little unscripted that I'm going about this, so I'll just kind of go through them one at a time and give my thoughts. The Moria card being banned, while I think this is good for the health of the game, I think the black was overly centralized around the Moria card. The only leader who was capable of kind of not using it for the most part was Blackbeard, who just couldn't use it. And we've seen Usopp, who's finally in OP10 gotten enough support to not use it, but it essentially gets the same card. And I do think that it is healthier for them to have variations of Moria rather than just giving every black deck Moria. Rebecca has some interesting trade-offs where it's not an attacking body, and you need your kind of payload, the removal part of it, to be in your hand. No, not in your hand. You need the payoff, essentially, as a separate card, so you can adjust the power level of the kind of engine card by making adjustments to the other cards around it, rather than the one card in the center being the centerpiece, where everything else around it was variable. I think it is better for balance in that sense. And I do think that it is better for them to put, if not strictly leader locked, ones that synergize significantly more with their particular archetype. That allows you to put different variations in other decks. We've already seen, I think it's Sengoku is a variation off of this card. We have Rebecca as a variation. And I think the new versions of it being somewhat more tailored to the deck will be more interesting from a gameplay perspective. That said, with Moria, I was actually going to try to build either Moria or Perona in this set and try to take advantage of the newer Thriller Bark stuff. So in some sense, I'm a little disappointed, but I do think that this is one of the cards that I've been interested in seeing banned for the longest time. So even though I was planning on a Dex to abuse it, I think it's probably for the best that it does go. All right. The next card, we have Jimbei. I genuinely was thinking this was going to either be a leader ban or a 2-cost teach or a bounce law ban, not the Jimbei ban. I don't think I like this ban as much as the Moria ban. I am interested, though, to see what Dofi does without it. Because this isn't something that I had kind of theory crafted around, specifically Jimbei getting banned, because I didn't think it was as likely. And then getting to keep both Teach and Law does mean that the deck gets to maintain some of its controlliness and some of its aggro. The difference being that it doesn't get to go wide on you as dramatically. And we'll see what that means for the deck. I don't think that the deck should be written off entirely. It is definitely been pulled back a pretty significant amount in its power level. But I do not know if that's going to be a death knell for the deck, or if the deck can exist in some much more reasonable spot. Yeah, I think that's what I've got to say about Djembe. Moving on to Ice Age. This one I think was kind of on my list. I do think that just considering the comparison to maybe an equivalent card for red, the other removal color, it's hard to design a minus power version of this card, especially at the -5 cost thing. I think -5 was probably just a smidge too high for decks, and it made it to where it was always Ice Age plus whatever the deck could do, in a way that kind of flattened the decks. I think that -4, and obviously we've seen -3 with restrictions, but a card draw is viable in Tempest Kick. I don't know about how Ice Age shakes out. I would like to see them try a -4, especially if they can do some playtesting internally and determine if that is a safe thing, or just a -3 without conditions. I do want to see one of those come in, because I think that it is important that there be some glue, and putting it on an event kind of without any other value is a kind of a barometer of kind of that black removal. And I do think it's a good place to be. Other things I could see them doing with a card like Ice Age in the future, if they take off Trigger and make it just a true brick with no kind of redeemable quality being in your life, I could see them trying that as ways to tone it down. But I think that the -5 is just a smidge too high on that card. But I am interested to see what they do. I almost would guarantee that in OP12 we'll see another black cost reduction card that costs 1. The last one, Kingdom Come. This one came as a surprise for me. I think I understand why they did it. Because they want to keep yellow as a more restricted color. I think with blue has a bit of an event focus. So blue is allowed to have stronger events from my perspective with Red Rock. And I do think that not every color needs to have the exact same strengths. So it's okay that they took this one out from that perspective. But I do wonder what their logic was for taking it out now. I don't know if we're going to see a yellow leader in the near future that gets some extra synergy. I mean, I guess the blue-yellow Nami could use this at 2 life without too much issue, because they get to draw the card after it. And then obviously Enel and Vegapunk both use this card very effectively. But I'm kind of unsure what they were aiming for with this. It's very possible that they just want yellow to be a color that isn't strong into opposing large bodies. And I could definitely see that being kind of their logic, in that yellow needs to have a kind of a recognized weakness, because they do have the large bodies. But in all my time with Robin, I think the thing that I noticed the most is that I can deal with mid-range stuff. I can't deal with the big stuff. It didn't matter if I had Kingdom Come or anything, because my bodies, while they were large still, they're not quite as large because they come with the heal. And because of that mismatch, maybe they wanted to make sure that there was still a reason to want to bring in other colors in dual color yellows, but also to give yellow a stated downside, so that you can kind of maintain some sort of color balance. But going over all of these as a whole, I think that the biggest winners from this, from my perspective, is probably decks like Zoro and Bellavetti, who are going to really take advantage of the fact that Jinbei means that the Jinbei ban means that Dofi can't keep up with them in board spam, so that they can reclaim that board spam kind of role. And the character Moria and Ice Age being hit is a big detriment to the black decks, who are always preying on your low cost spam decks like Zoro. So I think that Betty and Zoro are big winners here. And the fact that yellow also got hit, although I think that the yellow hit is probably less relevant for their matchup specifically. But if it keeps yellow out of the meta, that's one of the things that can most dramatically slow down those low to the ground decks, is like an Enel setting up with Yamatos and just healing through the board spam. So I feel like those red decks are definitely going to be pretty heavily advantaged. Thinking of other decks, Blackbeard obviously hasn't been hit here. And Blackbeard was one that was looking really strong into OP10 already. I am interested to see how it deals, though, with a resurgence in those other aggro decks. Reiju not being the one who can punish Blackbeard, but Zoro and Betty both being able to really put some heavy pressure on to Blackbeard. I wonder where that shakes out. And then into the future with the green, purple, and blue, purple Luffy's, where does this kind of shake out? Are there any other winners that I see for OP10 from this list? Robin probably benefits a decent amount here. It takes away one of our best matchups in Dofi. I think that Dofi is way, way, way more beatable for us. But I feel like that probably means that Dofi is not going to see anywhere near as much play. The black decks getting hit is a good thing for us. That Moria card in particular was one of the cards that just let everyone catch up with us. Blackbeard having to adjust their deck for more aggro. I don't know how that affects us. I'll have to theorycraft on that. But we'll see there. And then the rest of the meta, I'm not sure. Obviously, BY Luffy is toast. I do think the BY Luffy is still playable. And actually, for those who we were just going over the tier list, BY Luffy in the context of Moria being banned is a significantly more interesting leader to me. So there's a pretty high possibility that I will try BY Luffy in this set after the Moria ban and see if there isn't anything there that can be worked through. It is super hit though, but maybe I'll try it on Sim and see if there isn't something left in that leader, because it's a very strong ability. Not being able to cycle through the kids multiple turns in a row, I think is good for the health of the game, because that deck, in my perspective, was insufferable. But I do think that it would be real interesting to see what does that deck look like when you don't get to rely on the most overtuned card in the game. And then, yeah, I think that kind of wraps up my thoughts on the ban list. And I think we'll call it there, and I'll send it back to the regularly scheduled video. Thanks again for stopping in, guys. I appreciate all the support you guys give me, and I'm looking forward to a new set. I will talk to you in the next one. Bye.